Boys and girls, it is time for our missionary story. And who is it about? Does anybody remember? Yeah, Mary Slessor. And so Mrs. Lauren, Miss Hickman's going to be telling us about that. Remember, she may not be able to ever go back to Africa. And we were going to find out this week if she was going back to be a missionary. What she dreamed of all her life. Was she going to do it? You'll have to find out from Miss Hickman.
Okay, so last week, Mary got very sick and she had to leave Africa. And we wondered if she could ever go back. It was after she was in the innermost parts of these jungles and she made her way all the way back to Scotland. And that's what we see. She took her daughter Janie with her. Do you remember Janie? Janie was that first little baby that was left on her doorstep, and she decided to take care of her. So they made it back to Scotland. And when she got off the boat, she realized everything was a little bit different, and people looked at her a little bit different. She used to have this long, beautiful red hair, like all the other Scottish ladies, but now it was short because in Africa it's so hot and hard to take care of, and she noticed that was a little bit different. She also noticed in Scotland all the ladies' skin is nice and pale because there's not a lot of sunshine, but her skin was nice and dark and tan from the sunshine in Africa. And people began to look at her a little bit funny. And she was used to trudging through the jungles in Africa and chopping down high grass and walking through the villages like that. And now she was in Scotland and there was beautiful paved gravel and there was nice horses and buggies driving by, and everything was just a little bit strange for her. Even though she was home, it didn't quite feel like home anymore. But Mary had a very important job while she was there. After she got better, she traveled from church to church telling them about what God was doing in Calabar. It was very important. It was an exciting time where she got to meet with all the churches and tell these people of all the exciting things that God was doing. She knew it was nothing that she was doing, but the Lord was using her to do miraculous things in Calabar. Can you think of something that God was doing in Calabar? If someone is sitting next to you on the couch, I want you to tell them what was one thing that God was doing in Calabar. Can you tell them? I will wait. If you don't have anybody sit next to you, you just tell me. I'll be listening. I'm listening. Yes, God was doing many things. One thing he was doing, he was healing the sick. God was using Mary to be able to help people get better. And he was using Mary to spread the gospel. What is the gospel? The death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. You're exactly right. And these African people had this problem of sin. And did you know American children have this problem of sin? And everybody on this world has this problem of sin, and our sin must be paid for. But the good news is that Jesus Christ came and died on the cross to pay for our sin, didn't he? And he was buried. But did he stay buried? He did not. On the third day, he arose. And that's what we're celebrating today. And so Mary was sharing the gospel with them in Calabar. That's very important. She was making friends with the ladies and learning the culture and learning the language. Do you remember how to say hello? Make 'em, do. That's how you say hello in her language, the Efik language. So that's what she was doing, and she was going back and giving these reports to all these churches and asking for some more support, asking for some money from these churches so she could go live over there. Well, finally, after she got better, her body became healthy and strong, she raised a little more support. She was on her way back to the Oka young people. Oh, and she had learned to love those people so much, and she was so excited to return to her new home in Africa. She was thrilled about it. God was changing people, and she was so thrilled that there were not so many chiefs going to war anymore, and rumors started to spread that these Oka young people were changing. Well, then the British Army was from where Mary was from, sent over an officer called Sir Claude MacDonald. Now, I need you to sit up straight like a soldier, put your hand on your head like this, and say, Sir Claude MacDonald. Can you say that? Sir Claude MacDonald. Yes, that was a man that the British government sent over. And Mr. Sir Claude MacDonald met with Mary. And he was sent as a private spy over to Calabar. Nobody knew why he was there. And finally, Sir Claude MacDonald met with Mary and said, Mary, we have heard that these people are changing, and that is very good, but we feel like they need a little more help from the British government. We feel like we should send somebody over here to help rule these people and to help them not go into battles and not go into wars. Oh no. Mary thought, oh sir, please don't do that. These people are just now getting accustomed to these things, and if you send a stranger over, they're not going to listen to a British officer. Please don't. That will just cause more war and more troubles, and they've just started realizing the necessity and the preciousness of a little life. They're not killing their babies anymore. She said, please sir, please don't send anybody over. This will just cause problem. And Sir MacDonald just smiled at her, and he said, we want you to be the officer that we send over. So that day, Mary found out that she was going to be hired by the British government to do the job that she has been doing. That was such a blessing, because now she was going to get paid for serving the Lord. She could not believe how the Lord was taking care of her. She was so thankful that she was now hired by the British government. Well, shortly after that, her job got so important. She would meet these angry chiefs who had wanted to go to war with other villages, and she would say, no, men, now let's sit down and talk about it. And if you'll notice in her bag, I don't know if you can see that, but she has a little knitting needles and a quilt she is making. And Mary talks about how she would do this because she would be standing in front of all of these big African jungle men. I mean, these were strong men. They have killed all kinds of animals, and some of them have even killed people. So she would stand in front of them, and she talks about how she would be so nervous, but if she took out her knitting needle and started knitting, the men couldn't tell that she was nervous and her hands were shaking. So she would carry around her knitting needle, and her job was so important to meet with these chiefs and make sure that if there was a problem, they could work it out without killing one another. And oftentimes she would sit on her front porch and rock her baby back and forth as these chiefs would come with an argument and say, this chief took my elephant head. No, he took my elephant. And there'd be a big problem. And Mary, with the Lord's help, would sit and be the judge. Just like if we would go to court. The courthouses were held at Miss Mary's house. And so we see that Miss Mary and Mr. Ovens, that was the Scottishman who came over and put up her windows, served in Africa for 15 years. And they'd built many wonderful churches and schools and homes for people that were sick. And they saved many, many lives. And the Lord was using them in such a special way. Remember when I told you last week that if we follow the Lord's will for our life, He will use you in a special way? I want you to know that is true. Just like the Lord used Mary to reach hundreds of African people with the gospel of Jesus Christ and to save hundreds of lives and to rescue precious children, that the Lord can use you, and He has a special plan just for you. Maybe you think, Miss Lauren, I'm just 6 years old. I'm just 7 years old. That God has a plan for you. And did you know you can be a missionary just like Mary? You don't have to travel around the world to be a missionary. You can be a missionary right where you are. And if you will follow God, He will do such wonderful things, just like He did with Mary's life. I promise. Not because I think it's true, but because that's what the Bible tells us. We will live such a happy and fruitful life if we follow the Lord with all of our heart. But the most important decision we have to make is to become a Christian ourselves. We must believe that Jesus died on the cross. And we must believe that He was buried and that He rose again. And if we ask Him to forgive us our sins, if we confess with our mouth and believe with our hearts that Jesus Christ did that for us, we can become a Christian. And then it is our job, after we become a Christian, to tell others, just like a missionary. A missionary is simply a person who tells others about Jesus. You're exactly right. So things were going really well in Africa. She was employed by the British government. She was getting paid for doing things that she loved to do. She was very important. She was taking care of all these children and still running medicine to the chiefs and different things. Well, then all of a sudden, a terrible disease of smallpox broke out in the African village. And many of the people had moved from Iken's village closer to the river to do trade, so they were healthy and strong, but many, many people who were living in that village died of smallpox. Even the chief Edom, died. And Mary herself had to bury this chief that she had learned to love so very much. And so it was a terrible time in this deep, dark jungle of Africa. And so once again, Mary had to return to Scotland. She became very ill. But next week, we are going to hear about how Mary went to work with a tribe called the Aros tribe. Can you say that? The Aros tribe. Now listen, young people, next week is our last week with Mary Slessor, so please don't miss it. We're going to see what happens with the rest of Mary Slessor's life. So invite your friends, be there next week as we finish up Mary Slessor, the missionary to Calabar. All right, I hope you have a wonderful Resurrection Sunday. You celebrate Jesus Christ because he is alive today. And I will see you next week. Okay? Have a great day. I'll see you soon.